Hi, my name is Elena Kamenetzky. I am the Japanese teacher from Eastern High School in Louisville, Kentucky. I am also the 2019 KWLA Teacher of the Year and the 2020 School Teacher of the Year. And today I'm going to give a little presentation called Breaking Through the Classroom Boundaries, or using a practice diary to make the world just a little bit bigger for your students. So starting with the situation for many of us language teachers are in an undesirable boat that we may only see our students for 5 days a week or less than 5 days a week. If you're a teacher that has them on rotation, maybe you only see them once every 2 weeks. You may see them for as little as 30 or 40 minutes, sometimes with long breaks between when you see them between classes, especially if you don't see them every day. Long summer breaks between levels, and usually with mixed levels in the same classroom, so that splits your time and your attention as the teacher. So all of us here who have achieved some level of proficiency in a second language, we know this isn't the way to do it. But if you can't change your scheduling, then what can you do to increase your students' exposure to and use of the target language outside of the boundaries of the classroom? And then from the student's point of view, they tend to find language study frustrating when they don't see any reason to use the language outside the classroom. They're like, well, I don't know anyone who speaks Japanese. I don't know anyone Japanese or whatever. They think they get nothing from their language other than a grade. And sometimes when they have the opportunity to interact with a native speaker, rather than that being a motivating experience for them, some of them have the experience like, oh no, I don't understand what the native speaker is saying. I don't know what to say. And that actually ends up crushing their confidence and their motivation. So that can backfire if they don't have enough authentic experience with that interpersonal before they encounter a native speaker in the classroom setting. So what can we do to motivate students to get more of that authentic, real world practice, both with comprehension and interpersonal outside the classroom, and get them engaged in something that they find interesting and engaging enough that they're going to push through it even when they encounter setbacks, like they don't understand everything. So the situation for my classroom, why I started doing this with my classes, is the past 10 years, my 5th period has been a mixed Japanese 3 and AP class. And it's also the shortest period of the day, and I have only 40 minutes of class with a lunch break in between. So I get the students for 20 minutes, they go to lunch, they come back, I get another 20 minutes. That's my AP class with Japanese 3 mixed in. And I've been lucky that most years I've taught this class, there's been a native speaker in that classroom, but I also usually have 28, 29, 30 students in the classroom, so not everyone gets to interact with the native speaker every day. And I was starting to get very frustrated with the lack of progress that my students were making while they were hitting that, Japanese 3 plateau. And the AP students were not getting a whole lot of advancement in their proficiency, which was especially frustrating because it seemed like they weren't retaining things that they needed to be retaining, because I could tell they weren't using their Japanese outside of their 40 minutes, 5 days a week. So they weren't adequately preparing for the level of proficiency they needed for the AP test. So a solution I came up with called the practice diary. This started specifically for the AP students, and then I assigned it to Japanese 3-4 students, and then eventually I made a version for Japanese 1 and Japanese 2. So in its initial version, I told the students they had to read something, listen to something, and communicate in the target language outside the classroom every week, sometimes every 2 weeks if we had a weird short week. And then the students completely got to choose what they were going to read, what they were going to hear, and who they were going to talk to. So for Japanese 3, 4, and AP, this is the version of the practice diary I use now. For 3, 4, and AP, this is actually in the target language. This handout is in Japanese, but I'm obviously going to go through an English version for the purposes of this presentation. So starting with at the top, they get it on a Monday, they have to put the date, and then the due date is usually the next Monday. Right away, 2 things they have to do is spoken communication and written, digital typed communication. I make them do both. So for both of them, date, conversation partner, something I didn't understand. They have to write it down to the best of their ability, something I couldn't express. They write it down in English, and when I grade them, I help them express it in Japanese. For digital, date, conversation partner, format, Facebook, Twitter, Line, Instagram, other. And then a lot of my students use Discord to have those Japanese typed conversations. That's fine too. Same, something I didn't understand, something I couldn't express. Now this question is specific to Japanese. Did you use a desktop keyboard? The reason I put that there is because my AP students, when they take the AP Japanese test, they have to use a desktop computer with a desktop keyboard. And if they don't practice using that desktop keyboard, if they only use the Kana keyboard on their mobile devices, then they can't do it. So that's one reason I require them to like keep track of whether they're practicing that or not. Might not be relevant to your language, so you can feel free to like delete that from your own version of this. Reading practice article, I put article there by default, but they can also do a book, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Summarize what you read in English, and then something I didn't understand, they have to write down the whole sentence in Japanese, and then when I grade them, I help them. Listening, audio source or URL, summarize what you heard in English, something I didn't understand, transcribe it to the best of your ability. For listening, be prepared to accept music as listening. That's fine. You can also direct students toward good sources of listening, especially if you have standardized tests in your target language. Like in Japanese, we have like the JLPT, the National Japanese Exam, the SAT2, and of course AP. AP has the AP Classroom. News is also, like news videos are a very good source of listening because most news broadcasts are intended to be understood even if you're not watching them. So they make very good listening. Now this I add only to the upper level practice diaries, but words, phrases, or grammar, write it down, use it in a sentence. Students do 2 things with this. Either if there's something we're learning in class and they want to practice that, especially like new kanji, they put it in there. Or if like they're reading a book or like watching a series or playing a game that has a lot of new vocabulary, they write down vocabulary that's relevant to that, to what they're doing for their practice diary. That's fine. Either one is okay. Then other practice, your choice. Again, students can do more of something they did for other section of the practice diary, like if they had another written or spoken conversation, if they read another article, if they read another chapter in their book, if they listened to more music, that can go there. Other things that can go in other is if they watch something, like a TV show or a movie without subtitles, that can go there because I don't require watching for other parts of the practice diary. Or if they are playing a game in the target language, that can also go there. So initially my idea for practice diary was the students are always going to be doing this outside of the classroom. And then I ran into reality. And the reality was that my students have extremely overscheduled lives. Some of them work outside of school. Some of them play sports where they practice for hours after school. A lot of them don't have internet access at home. So me telling them to just go out and find resources on their own didn't necessarily work. So the 2 things I had to do to help my students is, number 1, I had to organize materials for them and make those materials available in my classroom. So here's a picture of the shelf that I have on one side of my classroom now. I do teach a section of humanities, so you can ignore the non-Japanese stuff on that picture. But I have a tub for comics. I have a tub for what I call bite-sized reading, so like maps, pamphlets, catalogs, menus, stuff like that. Nonfiction tub, fiction tub, and then we have a little bookmark station. So students can make a sticky note bookmark if they're reading a book that other students might also be reading. Let students take things home is something I had to allow. Although I do encourage them, especially with the books, I'm like, I know you have a mobile device. You can take a picture of the pages you want, and then you can take that home with you. But if they want to take home the physical book, fine. I do have a checkout system, but also I have learned over the years, students lose things. Students will move across the country without saying anything, and you'll never see them again. So you have to be okay with the fact that stuff that you let students borrow, you might never see again. So obviously don't put anything valuable in those tubs. Get multiple copies of a book if you can. For things like pamphlets, advertisements, tickets, stuff like that, make a copy and put the copy in the tub so that you don't lose the original. You have to give students lots of guidance at first in terms of like what's appropriate for them, what you would suggest for them, how to read like the books, how to determine whether a book is good for them. And you have to let them do the practice during school if they have to. So for example, with the speaking part, students can have a conversation with each other. If they have downtime during class, they can count that as their speaking conversation. They can have a conversation with you. They can grab something from the bookshelf and read it. If they have downtime, they can grab something from the bookshelf and take it to their math class if they know they have a test during math class and they're going to finish early. Again, as long as the practice is above and beyond what you're requiring them to do in the classroom, then it's still extra practice and it's still extra exposure, even if it happens during classroom hours. So why this is advantageous for students, it gives them flexibility and choice and motivation. So sometimes you have that student who really wants to watch telenovelas. That's their thing. They really want to play League of Legends in a different language server. Fine. If that's what motivates them to develop that stick-with-itness, that resiliency to push through and to improve their proficiency and to not get discouraged when they encounter things that they don't know right away, awesome. If that's what it takes, awesome. It also forces them to build cognitive and comprehension skills, like forcing them, especially the lower level students, to mentally sort through like the overwhelming amount of stuff they might not know and pick out only what they absolutely need to know to be able to understand the gist of what's going on. That's a really good skill for them to be developing. And this is something that helps them develop that. So something I do recommend my students do, especially the upper level students, is rather than do an online article every week for the reading practice, they should pick a book. And it can be a manga, it can be a comic book, but they should pick like a book. And they should read that book in little chunks every week for their practice diary, even if it takes them the whole year. And two big advantages to that is, number one, if it's the same book, it's going to use a lot of the same vocabulary and a lot of the same like grammatical structures over and over again. So initially it might be difficult for students, but once they learn sort of the core vocabulary for whatever is relevant to that book, it gets easier and easier for them as they move on, as opposed to them having to learn a whole different set of vocabulary every week by reading something new. The other thing is it really builds their confidence if they can stick with a book for a whole year or part of a year, and then when they get to the end, they look back at the beginning and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought this was hard. Like, this is so easy now. I've gotten so much better at reading. Yes, you have. You have gotten a lot better at reading. It's amazing. And then again, you could have like a little bookmark station in your classroom, sticky notes and pens, so that if multiple students are reading the same book, they can make their own sticky note bookmark, write their name and their date, stick it on the page, and that's fine. So as a teacher, here's what I've had to learn to zen about the practice diary. Look over here, students cheating, watching subtitles. Number one, my practice diary is always an engagement grade or participation or whatever you call it. It is never a proficiency grade, because especially if the goal is for students to do this outside of the classroom, I cannot control the quality of it. So they do it, they get the points. They don't do it, they don't get the points. That's it. That means that they get out of it what they put into it. So some students are going to challenge themselves every week. They're going to be improving their proficiency. And some students are going to pick something that's appropriate for like novice low every single week, and they're going to do that every single week, and they're going to get the points, but whatever. They choose to waste their time doing that. And ultimately, they're not getting any better at the language. And it's going to show when I grade them for things that actually are proficiency based. Hey, you're wasting your time and not improving your proficiency. You might as well put some effort into the practice diary and get better at this language. Students are going to cheat. They're going to watch things with subtitles. They're going to try to use online translators. Again, it's their choice if they're going to waste their time to earn points and not get anything out of it. Zen. And then you might have students that try to do something inappropriate, like listen to inappropriate music, or twice I've had this happen to me. Students watched a porno video and then they submitted, like for the describe what you wrote, they wrote exactly what they watched, and something I didn't understand, they transcribed something extremely obscene in Japanese. Both times I told them, hey, I'm not going to give you points for that. And I called their parents and I told them, and their parents punished them. I was never put on the hook for that. Thankfully, the parents never blamed me, especially because I now have on top of the practice diaries in English in bold letters, must be appropriate for school. Okay, so it's always an engagement grade. Students get out of it what they put into it. Time investment. So over here is an example of a section of a practice diary from Japanese 1, and for Japanese 1 and Japanese 2, they get the practice diary in English. It does take time to grade these. And I will say, as someone who absolutely hates taking things home to grade and who deliberately structures my formative and summative assessments in the classroom to be things I can grade on the spot so I don't have to take them home, you know, this can be boring and time consuming, but the reason I stick with it is because I've seen that there's a lot of benefits for my students. So the other thing you have to zen about is these take time to grade every week. They also become a fabulous source of authentic materials because you are essentially asking your students to find things every week. And my students have found so many amazing things to read, to watch, to listen to. And a lot of times when I'm grading these, I just look them up on the internet. And if it's good, I will download it and save it. If it's like a really good reading that's like, you know, something that's one page easy, like a menu or something, I will print it out, put it in the tub. Or sometimes I don't put it in the tub because I want to keep it and integrate it into the units I use in the classroom. So like the best Japanese weather forecast video I've ever found was something that a student actually found for a practice diary. And so I downloaded it and I ended up incorporating it into my weather unit. So for the lower levels, what I ended up doing was when I added practice diary Japanese 1 and 2, and I'll show you those handout examples in a minute. One thing I did for my bite-sized authentic reading tub, which is the tub with like, you know, the menus, the pamphlets, the subway maps, stuff like that. I labeled it in English to make it easier for the Japanese 1 students to navigate. And I was also very specific about my expectations for the practice diary. I'm like, if you take something out of this tub and you answer the question on the practice diary, it's like, what did I read? They cannot say a map or a ticket or a catalog. They have to demonstrate that they read something in Japanese on that reading material in order to understand it. So they could put like a map of the Tokyo subway system, or a ticket for an art exhibition of Picasso at whatever museum in Ueno, Tokyo, or a catalog for rental kimonos. So the first time I do practice diary with Japanese 1, I take class time to do it. And here you can see a picture of that class time so that I can introduce the available resources to the students and be extremely clear about my expectations for how I want them to fill it out, and sort of set them up so that after that initial time when we do it in class, then they're on their own to either do it as homework or to do it as downtime if they ever have downtime in class, or to take something like if they know they have a math test that day and they're probably going to finish early, they can like take a Japanese book with them to math class and they can do their reading during math class or whatever. So the progression by level that I ended up settling on for my students, again, this may or may not work for your target language, because with Japanese, you know, we have to spend like a semester sort of mired in learning the writing system before we really get to take off. But for Japanese 1 practice diary, I assign the students to read something, watch something without subtitles, and listen to something. They do not have to do interpersonal for homework for Japanese 1. For Japanese 2, I assign them to read something, watch or listen to something, and converse via speaking or typing. So there's a reading, watch or listening, and an interpersonal, whether spoken or written, is up to them. For Japanese 3, 4, and AP, that's the practice diary I showed you earlier in this presentation. They have to do 2 interpersonal. They have to converse in person and converse written or in type. They have to read something. They have to listen to something. Watch is no longer a requirement, although they do have to do that extra practice, and they can put watch something under that extra practice. So again, this progression may or may not work for your target language. You got to do whatever works for you. Do you have to tie practice diary to your classroom units? This is something that initially I sort of waffled back and forth on, and eventually I decided no. What I do at the start of units, when I'm usually giving the students new vocabulary, I very explicitly suggest, hey, for practice diary this week, if you're like doing keyword searches in YouTube or whatever, use some of this vocabulary, like how to make ramen. Like that might, you know, turn up something interesting and relevant to this unit. For conversations, a lot of times if we have a conversation in class, students will take those prompts, like the conversation prompts that we're working with, and they will just recycle that for their extra conversation for practice diary. That's okay. And then sometimes if I know there's something in the tubs that's relevant to what we're doing in a classroom unit, like if we're doing art and I happen to have a bunch of beautiful Japanese art books in the nonfiction tub, I will point them out to students like, hey, this is relevant. But I do not specifically require them to do things relevant to the unit, because sort of the galaxy brain moment I had with that was at one point, like for the restaurant unit, I was requiring the students to read a restaurant review in Japanese, and then for practice diary. And then I thought to myself, wait, if I want every single student to do this, this should be part of my classroom unit. So if there is a specific thing you want students to do, that's for the classroom unit. Otherwise, you have to leave it open to students. They may do something that's relevant and related to your classroom unit. They may not. And again, the they may not part comes because they might be super, super motivated to stick with watching the telenovela series, and they might stick with playing their game in the target language. And if that's improving their proficiency, then yay, that's the goal. So frequently asked questions from students. Number 1, how long does a conversation have to be to count for practice diary? Here's what I tell them. There's 3 things you need to answer in practice diary. What did you talk about? What is something your partner said that you didn't understand? What is something you wanted to say but didn't know how? So it has to be at least long enough for you to be able to answer those questions. Follow-up question, what if it takes me 10 seconds to hit all those 3 things? Well, 1, that probably means you need to choose a different topic of conversation. Or 2, you're novice low. You just got to keep practicing. Your conversations will get longer the better you get at it. 3rd question, what if I want to watch something in a target language that has subtitles that I can't turn off or hide? Cover the subtitles with your hand or a piece of paper. If that's all you can do, that's all you can do. Useful advice for my students. So for anybody else doing practice diary, here's what my students would suggest. Number 1, use Discord. So there's the Discord app logo over here. Set up a Discord channel for target language conversation practice, invite your classmates. This is what my Japanese 2 students have been doing. And you know, as a teacher, I'm not on the Discord. I cannot monitor the quality of the conversation practice, but judging from the practice diaries, they're getting some pretty good conversation practice in on that Discord channel. Play a game on target language server, because a game can count for lots of things. Number 1, if there's some sort of chat feature on the game, that can count as your conversation practice. Number 2, if there are scrolling story scenes, or if there are screens full of information to read, that can count as your reading practice, and you can screenshot things that you need to come back and take more time to read. If you're going to watch TV or movies, make sure you're watching things that are centered around, I guess, like normal everyday life or school life, because if you want to watch science fiction or fantasy, you end up spending all of your time figuring out made up words and not a lot of time improving your language. And this applies to books as well. So if you were to implement practice diary with your students, what sort of resources could you provide them to get started? What sort of practices, such as reading, watching, listening, spoken interpersonal, written interpersonal, would your target language require for each level? And are there any special skills unique to your target language, such as, for Japanese, forcing students to practice on the desktop keyboard? So let me show you really quick a couple of screens. Okay, so here's my Japanese 1 practice diary. So again, Japanese 1 practice diary is not in the target language, it's in English, same as Japanese 2. With a 3-4 AP, it's all written in Japanese. So read something. Hold on just a second. It's frozen. Hello, here we go. What did I read? Source of material, book title or URL, describe what you read in English. One thing I understood was, put the Japanese word or phrase and write it in English so I know that you understood it. And then Japanese word or phrase, copy to the best of your ability, something you didn't understand. Watch something, same deal. Listen to something, same deal. For what I didn't understand, you can write the timestamp or transcribe to the best of your ability. For Japanese 1, I start them out with some digital resources, like here's some search terms for YouTube. Japanese sports that they might not know anything about, like judo or kendo. Animal names in Japanese. Kyono Wanko is like today's puppy. It's a feature on NHK. Cute cats, specific animals. Commercials, I give them famous commercials to search for and some good search terms. News, trailers, music videos, your own search terms. Resources for reading, listening, and watching in Japanese. So, for example, are celebrity accounts on Twitter, Japanese news with furigana or audio for listening. So here's an easy news site and it has like audio recordings so you could read it and listen to it or both. Folktales, recipes, mobile games. I require them to show them to me for approval. And then ask sensei if you want to take something home. Ask sensei if you want a full episode of Japanese TV show with no subtitles because I have some on my computer. Bring your own flash drive. For Japanese 2, it's very much the same. Read, watch, talk to someone is new for them. Whom did you speak to? What was the topic? One thing I didn't understand, one thing I wanted to say. And then I give them some of the same starters. And then for chat apps, these are some apps you can use that will like connect you to a native speaker for chat. Hello Talk, Bilingual, Hi Native, and Tandem. I know I have Japanese. There are other apps out there that have other languages on them. Hi Native is not super set up for conversation. It's more of like you connect with a native speaker and you can ask them, how do you say questions? But you can have a conversation on there. Okay. Now let's go back to presentation. All right, so that concludes my presentation about using Practice Diary. I hope that you got some ideas that you can use and apply to your classroom, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.